Julian Cross had mastered the art of disappearing long before he ever lay motionless in a hospital bed, but never had silence served him as completely as it did now, with machines breathing and blinking for him in a private ICU suite that smelled of antiseptic and money, where every beat confirmed that the world believed he was gone, unconscious, unreachable, while in truth his mind was sharp and awake, tracking every whisper, every footstep, every greed-laced conversation that unfolded around him, because the accident that brought him here had not been an accident at all but a carefully orchestrated escape from a life where trust was a liability and affection always came with invoices attached. As the youngest self-made billionaire in the city, Julian had learned that people revealed their truest selves when they thought power could no longer hear them, and so he lay still, eyelids heavy, chest rising in a steady rhythm, listening as doctors discussed prognosis with rehearsed sympathy, lawyers argued quietly in the hallway about contingencies, and distant relatives speculated about inheritance with a hunger they barely tried to hide, yet none of that surprised him, none of it hurt the way he might have expected, because this was the language he understood, the currency he had lived with all his life. What he had not anticipated was Mira Hale, the night nurse assigned to him after a staffing shuffle, who entered his room without the reverence or fear others carried. Adjusting his four with calm precision, speaking to him like he could hear her, telling him the date, the weather, small details about the hospital as if anchoring him to the world mattered even if he never returned to it, and Julian, who had been spoken about more than spoken to for years, felt something subtle shift inside him, because her voice carried no agenda. Night after night, as he pretended to sleep, Julian learned Myra's quiet routines, the way she checked monitors twice even when they were stable, the way she smoothed his blanket as if comfort was a responsibility, not a courtesy, the way she hummed softly when the ward grew still, and he realized that for the first time in his life, someone was giving him attention without knowing who he was, without expecting anything back, and that terrified him more than any hostile takeover ever had. The turning point came on a night soaked in rain, when the hospital lights dimmed and exhaustion finally loosened Myra's careful professionalism, and she pulled a chair close to his bed, resting her elbows on her knees, speaking in a whisper meant only for the unconscious, confessing pieces of herself she had never voiced aloud, telling him about her mother's illness and the treatments insurance refused to fully cover, about the extra shifts she worked until her feet burned, about the dreams she had put on hold because survival demanded more practical ambitions, and as her words spilled out, Julian listened with a focus he had reserved only for high-stakes negotiations, except this time there was no angle, no play, just a woman trusting silence because it felt safe. She admitted she talked to him because he couldn't judge her, because a man in a coma couldn't look down on her exhaustion or her bank balance, because sometimes being heard mattered more than being answered, and those words landed like a blow, because Julian had built his empire on being unreadable, and now that unreadability had become someone's refuge. After that night, everything sharpened, and Julian began to see the hospital differently, noticing how kindness often went unacknowledged, how Mira defended patients who couldn't speak for themselves, how she corrected senior staff gently but firmly when care slipped into routine, and he watched as decisions were made about his future without him, including a quiet suggestion to transfer him to a long-term facility that would effectively remove him from relevance, a move motivated less by medicine and more by convenience, and it was Mira who pushed back, citing vitals, progress, dignity, advocating for a man she believed would never wake to thank her, and in that moment Julian understood the real cost of his silence, because his absence was no longer just exposing predators, it was endangering the one person who had treated him like a human being. Still, he hesitated, fear and calculation warring inside him, because waking up meant reclaiming a life he had intentionally abandoned, but the choice was made for him when Mira returned one night visibly shaken, apologizing to him through quiet tears for being unprofessional, for talking too much, for needing someone to listen, and that apology shattered the last excuse he had to stay hidden, because no one should ever feel sorry for being human, and without opening his eyes, Julian moved his fingers just enough to brush against hers, a small motion with enormous consequence, sending shock through the room as Mira froze, breath catching, heart racing, whispering his name as if afraid to break him. And when he opened his eyes at last, meeting her stunned gaze, the truth landed between them with more force than any spoken confession could carry. Alarms summoned staff, explanations collided, disbelief rippled through the ward as doctors confirmed what Mira already knew in her bones, that he was awake, and as the chaos unfolded, Julian spoke only to her, telling her he had heard everything, that her words mattered, that she mattered, and those simple statements rewrote the power dynamic of his life, because for the first time, he was not being seen for his wealth or influence, but for his capacity to listen. The fallout was swift and ruthless, with lawyers scrambling to control narratives and relatives retreating under scrutiny, yet Julian navigated it with a clarity born from weeks of silent observation, exposing agendas, protecting the staff who had acted with integrity, and publicly crediting Myra's care is a cornerstone of his recovery, a move that stunned the media and redirected attention from scandal to gratitude, and when he quietly ensured that her mother's treatment was fully funded, he did so without fanfare, understanding now that real generosity required no audience. As cameras eventually found him and questions flew, Julian told a different kind of story, one about what happens when you stop talking long enough to hear the truth, about the danger of assuming silence means absence, and about the nurse whose confession reminded him that being awake was not about power, but about presence. And as this chapter closes, remember that stories like this don't end when the heart monitor steadies, they begin there. So if this moment pulled you in, if you felt that quiet shift where everything changes, don't let it be the last. Subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because the next chapters go deeper into the choices, consequences, and unexpected love that follow when a man who owned everything finally learns how to truly listen.